Hey everybody, Keisha here, and today I am here with my friend
Jennifer Guskin.
and we need your help. We are right now working on advocacy for combating human trafficking, and here's why. So we'll give you a little bit back of our story and why we're doing what we're doing.
I was adopted as an infant by a couple who sold me throughout my childhood. I have been to Epstein Island and on multiple Lolita Express types of flights as a child. After I went public, Child Protective Services opened a substance-exposed newborn case, even though all tests came back negative, and they told me that if I wouldn't stop posting on social media, I would never see my daughter again. I started to connect how I was adopted as an infant and then sold throughout my childhood, how many other children who have been through the adoption, foster, and CPS pipelines have also been trafficked to Epstein's Ilk.
And as many of you guys know already, based on the work that we do at the Karis Project, I'm an American Indian born in Canada under the Jay Treaty. My father and I were exposed in the improper contagion mitigation for the COVID pandemic in early 2020. As a result of this, I lost everything: a house, cars, corporate assets, jobs. Bank accounts were shut down in Canada, and I fled to the US as an American Indian, fully documented, and was trafficked by rogue agents in ICE and other agents in the government, and forced to live with single American men. I was even imprisoned for 7 months initially, and then trafficked throughout the states. Put on full surveillance tracking and wasn't allowed to leave the city, house, or state without permission, or work without permission. And that happened for many years, and I was on and off the streets because of that, and in and out of shelters. And that is just a small example of what many go through in this trafficking system, be it the family courts or otherwise. So that's why the Karis Project will be going to DC to speak with representatives and do live reporting. We're also going to be in contact with other families who are dealing with human trafficking, and through the CPS courts or through any other means, lesser versions of trafficking, and doing reporting on them live and otherwise. We will also be working on, we ultimately want to shine light on what's going on with the trafficking here in the US. And we also want to meet with various agencies in DC, and we'll be going back and forth for training sessions and other things so that we can be better equipped to help people deal with resolving some of the issues that we're seeing. We will also be putting forth petitions in government to help people get justice, and that's something that we have been working on already so far. We have some petitions that have recently been filed in the state of Colorado, Michigan, Texas, and Arizona, and we will be continuing.
But we can't do this on our own. We will be traveling to events and training courses, as well as DC on a consistent basis. We also have to get acceptable equipment, such as computers, cameras, interview gear, etc. There will be other miscellaneous costs that would also be like gas, food, and rooms if necessary.
So that is why we are working towards combating human trafficking, and that is exactly why we need your help. We cannot do this alone, and most what the Karis Project does is on its own dime. And so we do love and appreciate each and every one of you that support us and all the work that we do. As many of you know, we also live stream on Lindell TV every day. And everything we do, like I said, is on our own dime. So we appreciate all the love and support and all the people who do donate, and we would very much love and appreciate that still. Thank you everybody for your time and considerations, and thank you for all the support, and we will catch you guys in the next one, and hopefully we might see you guys in the future and come across you and maybe be able to do some great things together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Karis Project podcast. Today we have with us Grant Ram, and he is a father of four, a businessman who's come over, had businesses in Alberta and Saskatchewan. He's been on the Business News Network and other shows, including the one with Premier Daniel Smith, and is now deciding to run for the PPC. He was part of Canada in is at Signal Hill, Calgary Signal Hill. And
That's right.
you want to just introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. Thanks. Nice to meet you all, or to speak with to you all. My background: I'm born in Calgary, Alberta. I'm a geologist by background. I've been involved in energy production um, and clean energy. So hydrogen from oil fields was the focus of most of my last 10 years. The problem that I've noticed in Canada. um, let me clarify. There are many problems with Canadian governance, and things have changed a lot since I was a little kid. And I'm a strong believer that new solutions and old solutions need to come back to the forefront in order to help Canada have more freedom and a safer society. So that's, in large part, and economic might, and that's in large part why I'm a candidate to run in this next election to be a member of parliament. I'd like to shift the Overton window to introducing conversations that are not mainstream, and this is one of them. I think that there's a lot of things that are ignored in mainstream news, and I'd like to put a spotlight wherever I can on important issues that are maybe uncomfortable for those that are currently governing us.
Yes, and I mean, I agree that there needs to be more spotlight put on a lot of things going on. And I mean, you have a background in geology. I've a background. I'm a mechanical engineering technologist, and so I have a bachelor of technology and did a lot of work with HVAC systems and so forth. I was a heavy duty mechanic. I worked in the oil fields here in Alberta for some time before we went over to Saskatchewan, and then ended up getting into the engineering side of things. But I definitely agree that there needs to be a lot more practical solutions. We need to have a lot. I mean, there was a lot of prosperity that seems to be dwindling as time goes on by mismanagement and a lot of federal encroachment, so to speak. So, sure, you can talk about that. I mean, what would you do in for your riding should you go to Ottawa with respect
Well,
to
one
the
of the interesting things about People's Party of Canada is there's not a party whip that makes you vote a certain way. So if somebody in my riding votes for me as a candidate, I am representing my local stakeholders in Calgary Signal Hill as opposed to some agenda from Ontario or Quebec or something like that. For example, there was a Bill C4 where it allows the government to sterilize children, and if their parents object, then there's a mechanism to put their parents in jail for trying to protect their own children from sterilization. I believe that many conservative members who are members of parliament would have voted against that bill if they had the freedom to do that. But when the party for these large political parties is told we will all vote the same way, that's what happens. So that's one of the things that I like about this. And what would I do? I would do my best to promote economic um, freedom, and by that I mean smaller government, less taxes, not supporting foreign wars, um, prison sentences that are meaningful for criminals, fighting and taking on things like the fentanyl crisis. So lots of budget for that. You see RCMP reports and statements that there are all these different problems occurring, known problems occurring criminally within Canada, and yet there doesn't seem to be a lot of arrests. So when there's scandals and scams from the political class or elsewhere, these need to be stomped out and eradicated for us to have a good, safe, and wonderful country. So I'll do my best to implement things that are in the good long-term interest of Canada, and in particular through the lens of my local constituents in Signal Hill.
Well, and this is something that's extremely important because a lot of people don't realize that when you go in and you vote for your candidate, they're not necessarily going to represent you and the will of the people in your constituency. Because if they have the party whip and they're saying you're going to toe the party line or else, well, that's not necessarily good for the people who voted for you and wanted you to do certain things. And so it is a good idea that the people, you get to vote according to what the people who put you there want, right? Like that should be the way it works, right?
I feel that's a better representation or manifestation of democracy when there's no party whip. So the people who elected me will look at the main platform ideas, and I am expected, I'm sure, to vote more or less in line with those and in along those flavors and trajectories. But there are some issues that are specifically unaddressed. And if it's not addressed in our platform at election time and we become a member of parliament, then it's up to the member of parliament to decide how they want to vote on those issues. And some are specifically left out, for example, abortion. So that there is no PPC policy on abortion other than the local candidate, if they're elected, will vote how they advertised and intended running up to the election. So for me, because there isn't much of a voice for this with the party whips and the existing large parties, I took a stance, for example, that I will vote pro-life on those things whenever the choice comes up. So that includes young life and old life. So I'm not a believer or a fan of the MAID program in Canada. I think there's been uh, the financial incentives are shocking when you hear about how money gets made harvesting organs from MAID, and it's like maybe this shouldn't be happening for us to have a better society and what is in the best long-term interest of Canada. I believe personally that that's pro-life, and if my voters agree, they can vote for me, or if my people in Signal Hill want to, they're welcome to. Not everybody agrees with that stance, and that's fine. But I think that part of why I'm interested to be in politics is to push a new flavor of conversation ahead and new types of ideas that are not being discussed between sort of the more globalist focused, you know, Agenda 2030, Paris Accord parties like the Conservatives, Liberals, NDP, and Greens.
Yes, and I think that people, if they understood what was being done with Maid, they would think twice. There's a girl, Kelsey, I can't remember her last name. She was on with Jordan Peterson a while back and actually started to talk about the Maid process and what actually happens when they give you those drugs. You actually drown in your own, like your lungs fill up with fluid, and it's not it's not a pleasant death, right? So these people are getting sedated and they can't move, and then they're drowning in their own fluids when they do this. This is barbaric, and a lot of the things is like if they got people got the help they need, they wouldn't be going to this, and this is wrong. Like I don't agree with that 100%. Like I mean, that's yeah, they should government should be not in that business. 100%. I agree
I
with
agree. That is not the role of government. So you can never stop everyone from suicide. It's tragic, but there will be some portion who reach a point where they don't want to do that. But to have the government involved and selling their organs sets up a huge potential conflict, obvious potential conflict. So I think that should not be part of what we as taxpayers are in support of.
Oh no, and I mean the government, like I say, should be limited. There shouldn't, like, for example, when we looked at the job gains that were made in the last couple of years, and Trudeau was talking about the job gains before he left, but most of that was government. And when you start increasing and making a bloated bureaucracy, the taxes are gonna go through the roof, and we're taxed to death already. Like I mean, you can't do this. So, what would be your stance on dealing with that inflated bureaucracy?
Well, there's a lot of answers to that question, but the quick one is reduce federal government involvement and employment by a large amount. So it expanded so dramatically in the last 10 years. It's totally bizarre, and part of it is because complicated systems are set up to support a complicated bureaucracy. For example, I read somewhere recently that on a per person basis, Canada has more tax collectors by 7 times than the IRS in the United States, who's already famous for being, a very, very large bureaucracy for that. And they have a notoriously complicated tax system. But if Canada needs 7 times as many people working for Canada Revenue Agency, that says something is wrong. We're doing something wrong. And so simplifying the tax code dramatically and getting rid of a whole bunch of unnecessary jobs so people can go find pursuits that actually add wealth into the economy rather than sort of diminish the economy of Canada. That's always better. So reducing regulations wherever it's possible, pushing decisions to provinces wherever it's reasonable and possible to do, and shrinking the scale and scope of the federal government. So there are many areas where the government just pops up and says, the federal government pops up and says, we're going to do such and such. And it might be incentivization programs for building houses. It might be a variety of other things. It might be pipelines. There's all sorts of things that the federal government has been reaching its hands into that I don't think is proper for it to be doing. That many of these decisions should be provincial and reasonably already were. And then there's a lot of overreach happening in influence, financial influence from the federal government, even right down to municipalities. I saw, for example, that Conservatives are saying, well, we're going to encourage cities to build tons of houses by giving more money to the ones that do and less federal money to the ones that don't. So I'm thinking, well, how is that fair if somebody happens to be living in a city as a Canadian citizen and their city doesn't want to build a whole bunch of, really fast, shabby government housing or whatever it might turn out to be. If your city doesn't want a population explosion, then why should you get less government services than some city that is encouraging a population explosion? And most Canadians don't want a population explosion. They want sort of steady as she goes, strong economy. Young people can buy a house and have children and that type of thing. So these influences from the federal government, which are all seems to be a lot of scandals throughout a lot of them recently. I'd like to do my best to make sure less money ends up being spent by the federal government on Canada.
Yeah, and I agree because you look at, I would suggest every Canadian go back and read the Canadian Constitution. Go read the 1867 section of the Constitution that lays out the federal and provincial powers. When you go back and you look at it, you'll see that the federal government has its hand in the wrong cookie jar so many times that they have no business to deal with it. And this is where the provinces need to start slapping their hands and telling them to get out because they don't belong there. And there needs to be people in Ottawa to sit down and say, no, you cannot do that. But they just stand by and just allow it to happen. There should be checks on both ends. But Ottawa shouldn't be trying to go in where they know they don't have the authority to do so. That's unreasonable. They need to have more restraint. And there should be people there that will say, no, we shouldn't do that because the Constitution doesn't allow us to do this. But somehow the last few years, it seems to be thrown out the window.
Yeah, right? So we need some more small government voices in Parliament. So I would be, me and anyone else in PPC, I'm pretty sure is going to be standing up there making the case for why Canada should not spend that extra money or influence that extra thing that is beyond the scope of what the federal government should be involved in.
Yeah, so I want to bring up something because this is what you hear a lot of about vote splitting. And, you shouldn't vote for the PBC because you're going to split the vote. You're going to let the Liberals in. What is your stance and what is your say why that's a bad idea?
Well, an interesting statistic and why that's wrong is that 40% of PPC members who join had no political affiliation prior to this. So they're frustrated with all of the existing globalist parties, and there wasn't one that they felt that they could vote for. So 40% is that. 45% is coming from NDP and Liberal. So if people are talking about splitting a conservative vote, but 85% of the people who are voting in favor of PPC are not coming from the Liberal side, and you're really only talking about 15%. If anything, supporting the PPC message might attract more Liberals to vote PPC or NDP or Green to vote PPC, and give their own candidate a better chance. So, I don't think vote splitting is further. I guess it's not a real consideration in a lot of very historically strong conservative ridings. So if there's a riding where some conservative person got 80% of the vote last time or 85% of the vote, and even if roughly half of the vote goes to one, either PPC or CPC, that still doesn't leave space for a surprise upset win by anyone else. So if you're in a very strong conservative historical riding, it's not really a concern. But yeah, I think the biggest is the fallacy of believing that PPC votes are coming away from the Conservative Party, because only 15% of them are from former Conservative members. And again, 40% were non-voters and 45% were from Liberal or NDP.
So
That's a Canada-wide statistic, and it's even, I guess it'll vary by riding, but that's the average that I've heard.
Yeah, and when you look at this, you're actually attracting new voters, period, which is good, because I ran for the Buffalo Party in Saskatchewan last year, and they had 52% of people voted. Like, it was just barely over 50. Like, so the turnout's low. People are burned out because they're like, we don't have viable choices, and so people stop voting. And this tells you that our our choices are bad. If half the people don't want to vote, that tells you something. So I think that it's good that alternatives are being brought forward that makes sense to the people, because the status quo can't continue. Like, I mean,
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes on Twitter, I use the phrase uniparty. So when if Pierre Polyev is saying the exact same thing as Mark Carney on a certain topic, whether it's tariffs or housing or immigration, and their policies are almost, or axe the tax, and their policies seem to be almost identical. Like, they still support the Paris Accord. They still have these long-term ambitions or near-term ambitions to reduce our access to internal combustion engines. And they're all sort of checking the same boxes. Well, who's really splitting the vote? Isn't the Uniparty worried about votes going away from the mix of policies that are very similarly described as liberal or conservative? It's like maybe one is liberal light or conservative light, but they're kind of, what they're saying from a policy perspective is very similar, surprisingly similar, in my opinion.
well, it's like, let's look at the reducing the internal combustion engines. Like, I mean, I looked at some of the climate modeling and stuff that they did in school, and I was like, no, it's bad. Like, I mean, what they're doing, you hear a lot of politicians talking about it, but you're not actually talking to people who actually understand how this works and the amount of efficiency that you're getting off of some of these things that have astronomical price tags, right? And they're only becoming viable. Why? Because they're getting corporate subsidies from Ottawa, and that's the taxpayer is getting somebody to become profitable on something that they would not be able to sell in the private sector because it doesn't compete with existing technology. And so I'm in favor of, sure, you want to develop better, like, green technologies, fine. Don't do it with corporate welfare checks. Make sure that you make a product that's competitive, that can compete with this without burdening down the taxpayer, right? That's really it.
Yeah, seems to make sense to me. And as somebody who is sort of at the forefront of a clean tech business, I also watched a tremendous amount of problems. So there was the scandal with SDTC. What was that? Sustainable Development Technologies Canada, where it turns out some of the fund receivers were closely related in some manner to the people who were making decisions on where the money goes. So I didn't know anybody who was getting money from the federal government for clean tech, even though I was a clean tech CEO, right in the thick of it and going to conferences and chatting with everyone. So they were happy to have conversations with you. but the money seemed to be earmarked for their friends. And if you wanted to go back and say, okay, well, how much did the federal government spend and how much value did it bring to our economy? You really, really, really struggle to find where government money was put in and something bigger came out the other side. So I agree with you. Picking winners is often best left to the free market. And I also think the allocation of capital is much, much, much more efficient with people who are trying to make a profit in a growth space. And if you do come up with something better and compelling, it will sell.
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing. And when they sat down and started to do these things, and I would dare say that you probably see a lot of this in almost everything that the government's giving money out. Because the government, from what I've learned over the last few years and how money just disappeared in the federal government, I'm sorry, billions of dollars should not go missing and you still have a job. Like, I'm sorry, if you're the finance minister and $60 billion or something to that effect just goes, I don't know where it went, well, why are you still in that position?
So I thought it was interesting when the guy who's running Ukraine, he canceled elections. So I'm not sure I can validly call him the president of Ukraine. But he went on the news and said, well, you say you gave us $200 billion, but we only have 100 billion of it. We don't know where the other 100 billion went. Well, yeah, I was in Ukraine in 2015. I knew it was a massively corrupt country. And I was just shocked and appalled seeing money just, thrown over to wherever, however, whoever, feeling highly confident that a lot of it's just going to end up in the pockets of oligarchs. So Canadian tax money, and even just there's an ethical question of if there's a foreign war that Canada is not involved with and not threatened by, should we be spending our own munitions, our own money and treasure on a foreign war and picking a side? Because this is like a lot of people dying. So they're in Ukraine, guys are going to the Russian towns near the border and harvesting all the men, taking them to the front lines, and they die. And some of that is happening from Canadian tax money. And I don't like that. I'm really uncomfortable supporting the deaths of all these young men or old men or, in Ukraine, all these deaths. I feel, yeah, as a taxpayer, very uncomfortable that that's going on.
Well, especially when the U.S. government came out, and this was, I think it was last year or something like that, where they came out and they said they had like 30 biolabs in the Ukraine publicly. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go with that's probably one of the reasons why someone would go and invade their country, because I know if Russia put like 30 biolabs along the border in Mexico, that would be a big problem. That's Don't do that, and don't expect us to pay for this when I see that Canadian soldiers are not getting proper equipment. They're eating spoiled rations. Why are we sending equipment over there when we can't even defend ourselves? That doesn't make any sense, right?
It seems like so much is topsy-turvy, opposite day. When I was a kid, I believed that the Canadian court systems were mostly fair. That there are exceptions where they are fair, but I've seen a huge amount of problems where something totally opposite of what you would expect to be a logical conclusion happens. And when a political idea comes out, it often seems like when you break it down and try and logically analyze the reason for the decision, the value for the taxpayer, all these types of things, and it's obviously not a positive thing, like canceling civil rights during COVID or whatever. Why aren't we talking about natural immunity? Why aren't we talking about risks of mRNA therapies, risks such as reverse transcription and serious harms, myocarditis? My friend's dad just died from myocarditis recently, about a week ago. There's these serious issues that it feels like our Canadian government is often pretending it's opposite day and doing the opposite of what is logical. Getting rid of the gold that Canada's bank owned. There's just you can pick examples from just about every segment of the federal government, and there's nobody standing up in Parliament saying, wait a minute, why don't we try doing the opposite of what you just suggested, and which is good for the long-term interest of Canadians.
Yes.
And
Sorry, we just got to take a short commercial break. I got to hear from
sure.
Mike Lindell, some pillows. Be right back.
You're still looking good.
I'm still feeling good. You know, I've got all your MyPillow products. Mattress topper, bed sheets, MyPillows, towels, slippers, blankets.
I'm interrupted this commercial to do something I've never done before. Get 2 MyPillows absolutely free on orders of $100 or more. I can't do this forever, so get on board with this great sale today. Our best-selling 6-piece bath towel sets or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Our famous standard MyPillows only $14.98. Queens $18.98. King size only $1 more. Body pillows $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bed sheet sets. Any size, any color. So go to MyPillow.com or call that number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And when you spend $100 or more, get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
So if anybody needs the MyPillow products, you go to mypillow.com/Karis or call 800-845-2942. Use the promo code Karis, and there's other ways to support. You can see it in the ticker. All right, get some good products. All right, kind of circling back there. The justice system in COVID got thrown out the window. I mean, on the Government Canada website, David Lametti was talking and basically calling all the chief justices across the country and said, you're going to toe the line. That, like, what? Like, why is this happening? Right? Like, this should not be the case. The government should not be interfering in the judicial system. And there needs to be some hard changes, because I know myself that I went through a lot of stuff with the judicial system and so forth, especially when I brought forward information that Health Canada was responsible for and should have corrected it at the beginning, because medical doctors don't do engineering controls. You don't come to people like me for heart surgery, because I'll kill you, right? I don't know what I'm doing. And the government, it didn't matter what it was. Like, I listened to Chris Schaefer. He was the mask guy. None of it, nobody listened to anybody. Like, everybody. And look at what they're doing to Dr. Bacchus. Like, they're extorting the guy for what? Speaking out against what was wrong, these shots that were experimental, right? I mean, and then what happened in Winnipeg? Like, come on. Like, why is nobody arrested? Right?
Why is nobody arrested? That's a great question. I had my truck stolen from the airport a few years ago, and it was used in a robbery while I was out of the country. Somebody smashed through the doors of a co-op and stood around. These guys were arguing with each other for 45 minutes, and eventually around 7 a.m., a cop showed up shortly after those guys just walked away. And when I got back, anyway, I'll save you most of the sob story, but the main surprise to me is the police wouldn't even tell me the guy's name who did it. They said, you don't want to deal with these guys. They'll be back out of jail tomorrow. And they're bad guys, and I'm not going to tell you their name because I think that they're likely to be very violent against you if you try and sue them or anything for stealing stuff out of your truck and wrecking it. So that struck me as problematic. You know, if somebody steals your truck and uses it in a robbery, and these are people who are known and in and out of jail like on an almost daily basis, something's really wrong, you know. If somebody does that, especially if there's a pattern, they should not be walking around and allowed to do this stuff over and over and over. Drugs are another big issue. So I was in a McDonald's ordering, at one of those pay stations, and the guy next to me was smoking crack in a McDonald's, and there's, this was on Stephen Avenue in Calgary. There's lots of cops around, and they don't seem to be enforcing. I don't know what changed since I was a kid, but I'm sure that if you were openly doing hard drugs on Stephen Avenue when I was a kid, you'd be arrested and taken somewhere, probably for a long time. Maybe it included rehab, maybe it didn't, maybe it'd just be prison. but you weren't out there chasing around my employees with knives and making a big mess in front of my business all the time and that kind of thing. It's just, I don't know what changed, and that might be more of a provincial thing. I'm not sure.
But it's the catch and release program where they've changed a lot of what is done, right? Because the federal government does like they appoint the judges in the superior courts for the indictable offenses, and they also have crown attorneys that answer to the federal government, which actually shouldn't really happen because the administration of justice is supposed to be under the exclusive control of the provinces, except for the appointment of federal judges, right? And then the writing of laws. So they're doing something, but they're the ones who are allowing all of this stuff, a lot of it, to continue, right? Because I remember like they would call people back from different places in Canada for C train tickets in Alberta, right? Because they wanted to send a message that you're not going to escape the long arm of the law. And now guys are like killing people and doing all kinds of crazy crimes, and they're back out on the street. But somebody makes a wrong post to hurt someone's feelings, and now they're in jail, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, or tries to protect their kids from sterilization and
yes,
literally going to jail, like that guy in BC.
yes, Michael Jackson. He ended up,
I
yeah,
forget his name.
he went to BC from Saskatchewan. I actually interviewed the guy, and because he didn't want them to do, or no, didn't want him to get the shots. There's another person that I confused that with. But either way, when you're trying to protect your children from something, why should you go to prison? Right? Like, I mean,
If somebody tried to cause problems for my kids in a dangerous, meaningful way, like permanently sterilizing them, or some sort of criminal abduction scheme, or things like that, I would die trying to protect them. And I don't think um, people should worry about getting arrested after if they're saving the lives of their loved ones. From if it's not a gray area, there's something clearly predatory and bad happening. I feel like it's outrageous if there aren't things in place to protect children. Then that is the parent's job. And last I checked, you can't trust the government to raise your kids, so it is the parent's job.
that's exactly it. And I mean, I think that something needs to be done with the way that the criminal code is implemented. And that's a federal issue because they need to start putting this down because this catch and release nonsense, it's not going to work anymore. And they need to have, I mean, sure, they first of all, they need to deal with the judges because there's no way to deal with a judge currently right now that if a judge does something wrong, there's nothing you can do about it. Like, too bad, right? Like, I talked to an RCMP and he said, I'm sick and tired of putting together a case that knowing this guy is guilty of sin, right? You've got all the evidence and only to let let the guy walk free. Like, there are police that want to do their job, so they can't do their job, right? This needs
Yeah,
to be fixed. Like, this is a huge problem that needs to be addressed because we need law and order. Otherwise, you don't have a country, right?
you're right. Absolutely.
And
Yeah. Or if you do have a country, it's chaos. I was in Sweden when the first time, I think it was 2012, the first time somebody threw a Molotov cocktail at a police car, and there was no law against it, so they didn't even know like how to arrest the guy because culturally, nobody in the history of Sweden had burned a cop car down. Uh, prior to the big problems that began around that time.
yeah,
And the entire country was distracted. Like everywhere you went, people were just in shock, and they had like this, look on their face, and that's all they were talking about for like 3 days. And I thought, even just the lost productivity amongst these millions of people, that was the most expensive car bombing ever. it's a Yeah, it's one of those things. It's really hard to have a satisfied, productive, smooth, happy country if there is injustice and if there is crime that is going on. Um, again and again, and especially this catch and release stuff. If you take the worst ones off the streets, a lot of those crimes disappear. If you've got a habitual criminal who's just out smashing windows for fun all the time, or beating up people or doing whatever they do, rapists and whatever, there's a lot of repeat criminals. And if you let them just wander around amongst your people, that's going to cause a huge amount of devastating consequence, including the amount of lost productivity and distraction, in addition to the personal loss and hardship that happens to the victims.
Yes, and I think that needs to be addressed because we have to have things that go correctly and to serve the people, because people want police that you can call that are going to arrest someone. You want a justice system that's going to, you get the due process, the person's found guilty, that they will get the punishment for their crimes, so that they should have the street safe for the innocent people. Not just let them out and say, oh, well, just don't do anything about it because they're bad dudes, and all of that kind of stuff. That's nuts. Like, right? And the federal government is, like, I mean, with the drug issue, the fentanyl and all that stuff going on, they need to clamp that down, because, I mean, there was somebody that reported, I think it was Sam Cooper, that reported about Justin Trudeau, how much money he was getting contributions from cartels. And then you had the foreign interference hearings, and they testified. One of the CSIS guys said every government from Mulroney to Trudeau was compromised by agents of the CCP, and that there's foreign aid, and they can prove this, and they've got their MPs that are controlled by foreign governments and entities that are sitting in the House of Commons right now, and they can't do anything about it. I was like, what?
Yeah, and there's the 41 members of parliament that we're accepting foreign influence, whatever that means, because we don't know a lot of the details. And now we're being asked to vote for a lot of repeat members of parliament, of which 41 are traitors to Canada, essentially. So that seems like a very problematic and insulting situation. And in fact, so one of the reasons we know that none of the current PPC candidates are in that traitor group is because none of them were members of parliament. But amongst the ranks of Conservatives, Liberals, NDP, Bloc, and Green, there are people. It said all parties have at least some involvement in this, and so I feel like it's kind of insulting to give me a incumbent member of parliament to vote for, not telling me whether they're a criminal and a traitor to Canada or not. So it's really shocking that Canadians are being put into this position.
Well, yes, and like I was on an election integrity call with Steve Stern, talking to some Americans about some of the stuff that was going on here in Canada, and kind of put in there the clip where Maxime Bernier was talking about how he lost the Conservative leadership race. They had 240,000 registered voters for the Conservatives, and he lost 49% to 51%. But and they reported this on the National Post that it was 250,000 people who voted when there was only 240,000 people registered to vote. So they cheated, and then they're like, "Well, we destroyed the ballots." And then when you look at what happened over the last few years, and you look at what Maxime Bernier's policies were, you can see why they didn't want someone like him going in there, because he would have been like, "What are you doing?" Like, especially with what they did in Winnipeg, which, I mean, we know that where it head to at Wuhan, where they were building stuff with Peter Daszak and the EcoHealth Alliance that the Americans reported, and the Nipah virus was found in spike protein, right? Why are people not being arrested, right? The RCMP should be arresting people because they have the power to. I know there's political pressure to keep them down, but they need to arrest those people because they shouldn't be.
So what happens when the police stop enforcing things is you get vigilantes. So if some angry family lost 2 kids to fentanyl and they feel like there's nothing left and no justice, they might go fentanyl hunting and find the guys making the fentanyl and take them out. I read about some guy in the States who apparently legally was hanging around outside convenience stores in the middle of the night in rough areas and so trying to get robbed. And so far, he's shot 17 people, and it shows them the footage that it was self defense, and they don't even pick him up. So there's going to be a lot more bad guy hunting if there's no justice and no cops. There's going to be a lot more Batmans and Casey Jones out there with their hockey sticks, if we can't depend on cops to stop people from harming us, whether that's robberies, whether that's theft. We should have some belief that our system will protect us on some scale. And if enough Canadians lose faith that that's happening, there's going to be a continued increase in vigilante behavior.
We need a government that works for us. Like, they don't have to be perfect, but they got to work for us, right? Like, nobody's expecting somebody to be perfect, but this is unacceptable. Like, you got fentanyl pouring in, and the tariffs are coming. They're talking about the fentanyl. Well, stop it, right? Like, it's not only killing the Americans, but it's killing Canadians. Like, what is it? 40 something thousand people have died over the last few years from fentanyl. Like, that's a lot.
That sounds like a Canada only statistic.
That's Canada only. That's just in Canada. And so, like, 40,000 deaths of fentanyl, that's 40,000 too much. Because
it's
insane.
You're right.
And they need stiff penalties for that. But again, the law enforcement's not getting the resources. Like, I talked to a girl in she was on the East Coast, and she said that she had RCMP that came to her because their human trafficking training budget got cut. Right? So they're cutting budget, like, even like with this whole thing for organized crime and the money laundering, and the Cullen Commission report in BC talked about their funding cuts to be able to police those things. So
there's two kinds of taxes. One's where you just take money at every little bit. You're in a paycheck, you pay a tax. You buy something, you pay a tax. And Canada's kind of maxed out on that. And I think they've also kind of maxed out on, they've tested the limits of inflation. So that's the quiet tax, where they just expand the money supply by having these big programs and literally just inventing money to pay for them, which means that there's more Canadian dollars around. So the value of them goes down. So now everything gets more expensive because you need more of these dollars to buy whatever it is you want. That's the worst kind of tax, because it focuses on the poor and the young who don't have assets that are making the money and investments that are inflating in price and that kind of thing. And I think I'm like very concerned that as the government spending grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and tax is already kind of maxed out in every conceivable way, then more and more budgets are just going to continue to get sliced. And then you throw that into the mix of a rapidly expanding and shifting demographic. So you end up with 5 million extra people in Canada, but not enough schools and roads and churches and houses and whatever, all the infrastructure that's needed. Hospitals, doctors are a big issue. So, with now your waiting time for a knee replacement or something is what, 3 years? So I don't know what it exactly is, but it's like something measured in years. And part of that is just because there's just way more people coming in, and you don't have the money to catch up to all of this. And so, and I guess shrinking the government helps so many things financially in Canada, so that there's more services available and affordably.
And like you're talking about, the immigration in Canada is absolutely out of control. There's no checks and balances. Last year, by the time July rolled around, they had over 1 million immigrants brought into Canada. That's 2.5% of the population in 7 months. They're bringing them here to become homeless. They're putting Canadians on the street because the vacancy rate is almost nil in pretty much all the cities, and so the prices of everything are going up. There's nowhere to put them. Why are we doing this? Is it fair? It's not fair to us. It's not fair to them to bring them here saying, oh, you're going to get work, and now you're going to be, oh, guess what? You get to sleep in a tent city. Sorry, right?
This is another case of opposite day. So if you think, what is in the best long case for Canadians in the long run? It's that they feel like that young people can buy a house and have a family, and raise their 5 kids or whatever, and really, replace themselves and replace and more, and just feel comfortable like their grandparents did back in the 60s or 70s or 80s. And now that doesn't exist. And so they're saying, well, people aren't having enough kids. We have like one of the lowest birth rates on the planet. So there's South Korea, Japan, and a few of these that are maybe slightly less likely to reproduce. But Canada's really, really, facing population collapse. And they say, oh, we'll just bring in tons and tons of people. That's different than saying we want to bring in people who make Canada more prosperous and safe. My mom's an immigrant. A lot of my friends and loved ones are immigrants, and came in at a time when there is a filter for people who are adding value to Canadian society. So basically, that kind of amounts to making Canada more prosperous and safe. And that filter turned off to a very large extent just after COVID, and the numbers are shocking. And I believe that this is mainly to try and influence how voting happens in a whole bunch of areas. They might not want to vote PPC because they watch the Main Street News where PPC is never even mentioned. And you end up with, more of a globalist policy framework for conservative, liberal, NDP, Green, the mainstream choices. So I think that's and economically, of course, it's been catastrophic for Canada as well.
Oh,
Not enough housing and that type of thing, but there's.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I think we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty here. Of course, that happened. Yeah. This happens quite often. I mean, it just seems to be that way. But yeah, we're definitely having some issues. Okay, it seems like. Well, it looks like he got disconnected. Hopefully, well, he'll be back shortly so that we can finish this up. But we're having some serious issues. Regardless, Canada needs to definitely fix its situation because, I mean, we can't continue this way. This is madness. Having out of control immigration and so forth. It's not saying that you can't have immigrants. We definitely had waves of immigration, which is important. But what we need to do is yeah, what we need to do is basically just go back to things that work, and so forth, and put the brakes on it. That we can just basically have some kind of normalcy, like people that add value to coming in. And there we go. There you go.
I'm back.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of where we were at, we're talking about the immigration and making sure that it's reasonable. There's nothing wrong with immigration, just do it responsibly. But
Yeah,
now,
we should be inviting great people to be Canadians. But we shouldn't have it open borders. Anyone who wants to could just come and take services that are already stretched too thin.
well,
That's yeah,
I
obvious.
I agree. It's like you wouldn't leave the door open to your house and just say come on in without vetting them, right?
Yeah,
And it's the same thing here. And I think that needs to be dealt with. I know that we're kind of, yeah, we're going to be running up here on time here. But what do you want to say to people? Why should they come and vote for you? What, get your 2 minutes here.
sure. Well, I think a part of it is because of economic freedom. So having Canadian money be worth something again. So having a gold-backed currency with a 0% inflation target will give buying power that increases through time for Canadians and makes savings useful, as opposed to a currency that's completely fiat and in sort of a runaway expansion. So with a target to have it reduce value, compounding annually, I think that's a very significant and underappreciated aspect. Canada has a lot of resources, and the federal government has been blocking their development. So there are tools within the Canadian government to allow pipelines to the coasts and various things like that. That should be allowed so that economically Canada can sell to the international market lots of different resources and finished products. Um, there needs to be a big hiatus for mass immigration. Again, I'm in favor of immigration, but right now we've bitten off way more than we can chew. So we need to chew what we've bitten off and then go back to responsible levels of immigration, which is probably 100 or 150,000 people a year. That's enough for us to integrate them into Canadian society and, build with them as we make Canada bigger and better. It's it's a lot of problems happen when culture shifts too quickly. If it's an artificial sudden shock, then there's a whole bunch of problems that emerge that we just don't need to take on as Canadians. So the People's Party will support a moratorium until our services and housing availability and things have caught up with what's already happened, and then go back to responsible levels of immigration to attract great people to Canada. Um, if I have, I guess, one more that I'd say, for me, foreign wars. I'm really against funding foreign wars, and if I'm elected, I will do my best to keep Canada's money in Canada, and spend as little of it as possible by shrinking government and making systems more efficient. For example, um, less people working for CRA because there's a simplified tax code.
That sounds pretty good because we need to have like that. That's way too much. Like people working for the government on for taxes. That's insane. A lot of them are not doing their job, and you know, they're wasting our money. And so I agree with that. So I'll tell people here to go and check you out. Look at when it comes down to voting. This is one of the most important election in our Canadian history. We need to have change. We can't go back to the same thing that we've had over and over again and expecting something different because we've been shown for the last, especially 5 years, what to expect. And so we can't go and put the same people in there and expect them to do something different. This is just absolutely absurd. So I'm going to close here with a prayer and thank everybody for coming. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your love, grace, and mercy. We thank you for the hope that you have given us this day. And Lord, I ask you this day to bless Grant and other men like him that are wanting to go out and make changes, and that the men and women will come together to rebuild their families, their communities, their churches, and our nation, and that we would have some law and order and sensibility restored in this land is my prayer. In Jesus' name, amen. And
Amen.
thank everybody for coming, and until next time, we will see you guys again.